So today I want to address an issue of what the Democrats and the media keeps calling the big lie. I mean, which is kind of interesting for Democrats and the media to talk about the big lie after several years of the Russia hoax, and then promoting an impeachment based on a simple phone call about what Hunter Biden was doing in Ukraine, which turns out Hunter Biden was doing in Ukraine exactly what Trump thought he was doing in Ukraine. So in other words, this whole thing has been yet the Democrats keep talking about the big lie. So that's the kind of thing I want to get into here. By the way, if you like these videos, again, please subscribe, give me a like. That helps out with the algorithm, and of course, any comments are appreciated. Okay, so that's what I'm saying, the big lie. So what they're claiming essentially is Trump's complaints about the election outcome as a big lie. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with the election. Everything was just perfect about the election. But I guess the question one has to realize is was the election really all that perfect? I think that is a real issue for us all here, because it probably wasn't. First of all, there was a lot of irregularities in terms of the way judges changed the rules arbitrarily without any legal authority to do so, and the degree to which the Supreme Court stood back and let that happen. Particularly, I can't blame Justice John Roberts particularly for this. You can expect, of course, the leftists on the court to go along with it, but I think that there was a bit of weakness on the court on this, which was really unnecessary there. Of course, one could argue that some of this occurs largely is because Trump had managed to annoy members of the court by making a variety of statements that the court didn't want to hear. And that probably is partly true. But the whole idea, though, that the whole thing is a complete lie, I think is really not as justified as they thought. I was noticing today that, for instance, Liz Cheney has gone off on her own little rampage and lost her leadership position in the House. And I mean, why did she throw that away for nothing? I have no idea. Now it turns out that the left is becoming increasingly unhappy with her. Well, I guess she's become kind of useless to everybody now. But the point was interesting that they were trying to get after her, that would she admit that there was really the things that increase election security are not valid. But in fact, there has been a fair amount of cases of where there's fraudulent voting, and I think there have been cases where it definitely changed the outcome. For instance, I think a Senate race in Minnesota some years back, I think quite well could have been fraudulent. So that's an example. There are other cases of that sort where this is to be the case, and I wouldn't put anything the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, I think, would support a fraudulent election if it elected a Democrat. So I don't think they have any real integrity at all. So that's kind of my general thoughts on that subject. So where are we getting at here? I still think that while it's clear that there is a case that's been made, I guess I've kind of hit this before, at least not in a dedicated video, but some of my comments during a video. The fact that if you look at the broad popular vote in the 16 election and 20 election, you'll show that they're pretty consistent with each other, amazingly so. The main difference is there was about 20 million more votes cast. But in terms of the percent breakout, it was pretty similar. And the main difference was the lack of viable third-party candidates. The total was nearly 6% in the 16 election and 1.5% in the 20 election. So if one assumes that most people voting third party were definitely not pro-Trump people, and since Hillary Clinton was not there to hate anymore, and if Joe Biden is such a non-entity that nobody had a strong opinion about him, that is to say, they weren't persuaded that he couldn't handle the job, which I guess they weren't paying too much attention, but at any rate, and that he obviously hadn't created the kind of antagonism that Hillary Clinton had historically. One would conclude that most of the people that didn't vote for a third-party candidate in 20, which is a significant number of people, probably voted for Biden. And even at that, Trump did improve his percentage about over 1% in the 20 election over 16. So there doesn't seem to be a real big problem with the mass popular vote. The real issue, I think, comes down to a selected set of competitive states in which there were very narrow victories by the Democrats, which seem to be driven by kind of irregular voting patterns in Democrat strongholds, and situations where there were a lot of absentee ballots floating around more than normal and maybe not as controlled as they should have been, that the signature verification procedures were in many cases basically ignored, particularly in Georgia. And that there seems to be a significant possibility that people who were, fraudulent voters, the voting dead, so to speak, people whose registration was from a non-residential location, maybe a UPS mailbox instead of an actual residence, that sort of thing could lead to be an indicator that there really were actual fraudulent voters, as individuals that had registered more than once apparently in order to vote fraudulently, and people who were dead, who somebody found out their information and voted for them. Also, people that had left the state in question and maybe had voted twice in 2 different states, or at least were registered in different states. Now, there is a caveat on that. Some of those people may have literally left the state at one point in time and then came back, and they might have been legitimate voters in the state in which they voted. You'd have to learn a little bit more about those cases. However, it's also possible that many of them weren't, and that's that's the kind of argument that there could have been fraud, and it wouldn't take very many cases, to overturn some of those races. And that's why I say the idea of characterizing this as a big lie is really bogus. I think at best you'd say it's kind of an uncertainty as to how many fraudulent votes were really cast. And of course, even if you confirm that some of them were, how many would be could be identified. Now, right now, of course, we're having a big audit in Arizona, which is being highly criticized by the left. And what's really interesting about this is they're so convinced that there's absolutely no indication of fraud at all. Why are they so worried? After all, I mean, even if they come up with some variation from the original official count, the thing would have to go to court, and probably the Democrats would be in plenty of position to throw up a lot of smoke screens of their own. And I don't know. My own opinion is I have my doubt that no matter what came out of the audit, I doubt anything is going to change the actual election outcome at this point. I just don't. Some people can hope for that, but that I don't see as likely. What I do, but it might actually justify some of the measures that Republicans are taking to try to, strengthen the voter integrity. And the very fact that the Democrats have this HR1/S1 bill that they're still pushing, which would basically ban voter ID, would allow same-day voter registration, which is, again, a very bad idea, because if it is fraudulent, what can you do about it? They will have already voted, and there'll be no way to separate their vote from the legitimate votes. I mean, obviously, they're clearly pushing to allow more fraud to happen. And so I think that the Democrats' claim of a big lie is quite bogus. And I think it should be, Republicans need to be more confident in this issue. And I think if they take the position I'm taking, rather than the position of a massive fraud, which has pretty much been discredited, I think, and the idea of of nothing to see here, and take the middle ground, that at a minimum they could take the position that the outcome is really unknown, and that there were a lot of irregular decisions made during the 2020 election. And so that would be my recommendation, which would allow them to avoid either directly attacking a Trump position nor yielding to the Democrat position. But it seems like almost nobody does this, which is kind of strange, at least in terms of elected politicians. It seems like they seem to feel like they have to take one extreme view or the other, which I don't think that is necessary. Anyway, that's my thought for today. So I'll leave you with that.